I never imagined that my quiet 9-to-5 marketing job would turn into the most stressful chapter of my life. And before I go on, drop a quick comment below. Have you ever dealt with office sabotage? I'd love to hear how it compared to my story. Our agency sat on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. I had been working there for nearly 3 years, mostly handling brand campaigns for mid-sized clients. My closest colleague was Jenna, a sharp copywriter who could turn anything into gold. Then there was Mark, the account manager. He had this perfect smile, the kind you learn to mistrust after spending enough time in corporate America. At first, everything seemed normal. Deadlines, coffee runs, brainstorming sessions that dragged too long, it was the usual rhythm. But then, projects I managed started slipping through the cracks in ways I couldn't explain. Files went missing, emails were never received, and clients began hinting they were disappointed with my performance. The first real sign that something darker was brewing came during a Monday meeting, when my boss looked straight at me and asked why a critical deadline had been missed. I opened my mouth to explain, but what I saw on Jenna's laptop screen froze me in place. It was the first clue that someone wasn't playing fair. The project in question was for a client called Brightway Furniture. They were expecting a full campaign rollout by Friday, but somehow the design files had never reached them. My boss, Mr. Reynolds, had a reputation for being calm, but I could see his jaw tighten as he stared at me. I had double-checked those files before leaving on Thursday. I knew I had sent them through our shared drive. Yet when I opened the folder in front of everyone, the latest versions were gone, replaced with outdated drafts. My stomach dropped. Jenna glanced at me, her brow furrowed like she couldn't believe it either. Mark, on the other hand, was suspiciously quiet, just leaning back in his chair with that same polite smile. The fallout was immediate. Reynolds told me we couldn't afford mistakes like this with Brightway, not when they accounted for nearly 15% of our yearly revenue. He asked me to stay late all week to make up for lost time. It wasn't framed as punishment, but everyone in the room understood it that way. As the meeting ended, Jenna whispered that she'd help me dig into the shared drive logs later. That gave me a flicker of hope. But as I walked back to my desk, I caught Mark giving me a look that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of look that said this mess was only the beginning. That week felt like walking through quicksand. Every step forward came with a silent drag pulling me back. By Tuesday, another deadline slipped. This time it was a set of analytics reports that suddenly had corrupted data. When I opened the files, half the numbers were scrambled nonsense. I stayed late trying to piece everything back together. Jenna sat beside me, combing through audit logs and backup copies. "It's strange," she said, squinting at her screen. "The edits don't look random. They were made at 2 a.m. from an internal login." That was impossible. I didn't work those hours. Neither did Jenna. Only a handful of people had access that deep into the system. My chest tightened as I ran down the list in my head: myself, Jenna, IT, and of course, Mark. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Mark waltzed in with his usual Starbucks cup, cheerful as ever. "Rough week, huh?" he said, almost too casually. "Hope Reynolds isn't giving you too hard a time." His grin didn't reach his eyes. For the first time, I wondered if that grin was hiding something more than indifference. Maybe it was satisfaction. Maybe it was triumph. But I didn't have proof, just a gut feeling. And in the office, feelings didn't count for much. That's when the Brightway client called directly, demanding answers. When my phone rang that afternoon, I recognized the Brightway number instantly. My pulse spiked. Clients rarely bypassed account managers unless something was seriously wrong. I picked up, forcing a steady voice. The woman on the other end, Brightway's marketing director, didn't waste time. "We've been told the delay was due to your team not meeting deadlines. Is there a reason you didn't deliver what was promised?" Her tone was sharp, laced with disappointment. I stumbled, explaining that files had been misplaced and corrupted, but we were working around the clock to fix it. She paused, then dropped the bombshell: "That's not what Mark told us." I froze. According to her, Mark had reached out the night before, saying I had forgotten to upload the files, and that he had personally stepped in to clean up my mistakes. My grip on the phone tightened as my eyes darted across the office toward him. He sat at his desk, cool as ever, sipping his latte like he had nothing to do with this. By the time I hung up, my head was spinning. Not only was someone tampering with my work, but now Mark was feeding the client a story that painted me as incompetent. And yet, when I looked around, everyone else seemed to believe his version. That was when the first real piece of evidence surfaced. something I hadn't expected to find. Late that night, Jenna and I dug deeper into the shared drive. We were hunting for any trace of what had happened to the Brightway files. That's when Jenna stumbled across something odd, a spreadsheet tucked away in a hidden subfolder, labeled with nothing more than a string of random numbers. When we opened it, my heart dropped. It wasn't project data at all. It was a detailed log of deadlines, deliverables, and client notes. With one major difference. Every error, every missed file, every corrupted report was tracked there, with my name listed as the one responsible. The entries were dated weeks back, long before I even noticed problems. Someone had been building a paper trail, framing me piece by piece. Jenna leaned closer, whispering, "This looks planted. It's too neat, too perfect." She was right. No one keeps records like that unless they're trying to prove something later. And the only person who stood to gain if I looked incompetent was sitting just 2 desks away. The weight of it all settled heavy on my chest. If Reynolds ever saw this file, my career at the agency could be over. Worse, Mark already had the client on his side. I realized I needed to find out how he was pulling this off, before that spreadsheet made its way into the wrong hands. What would you do if you found evidence like this? Confront now or wait? By Wednesday morning, the tension in the office was like static in the air. I barely had time to sip my coffee before I got a calendar invite from Human Resources. Just a 15-minute check-in, but I knew what that really meant. The HR manager, a calm woman named Lisa, greeted me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've noticed some client concerns and internal delays," she began, flipping through a folder of printed emails. "We just want to understand your side." I felt my throat tighten. The emails in her hand weren't mine, at least, not as I remembered writing them. One showed me allegedly forgetting to attach final files, another where I supposedly promised a deadline extension without approval. The wording felt off, just slightly, like someone had copied my style but missed the rhythm. I tried to explain that I hadn't sent those messages, but without proof, it sounded weak. Lisa nodded, jotting notes, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "We'll keep monitoring," she said finally. "In the meantime, try to double-check everything." When I left her office, Mark was standing by the copier. He gave me a small nod, like he already knew where I had been. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I swore I saw the faintest flicker of victory. That's when I realized this wasn't just sabotage, it was a setup. That evening, still rattled from HR, I decided to stay late again. The office was nearly empty, just the hum of computers and the glow of desk lamps. Jenna had already gone home, promising to dig more into the server logs from her laptop. Around 9 o'clock, I walked past Mark's desk on my way to grab another coffee. That's when I noticed something strange. His computer screen was still lit, open to the shared drive. Mark himself was nowhere in sight. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced around, completely alone. Then I leaned closer to the screen. My stomach clenched. On his desktop was a folder labeled Backups. Inside were duplicates of project files, email drafts, even client call notes. At first, I thought it was normal documentation, until I opened one. It was an email chain between me and Brightway. Except I had never written it. The messages made me look careless and disorganized, almost word for word like the ones HR had shown me earlier. My hands shook as I scrolled. These weren't just forged, they were rehearsed. I quickly snapped photos with my phone, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear. Just as I closed the folder, I heard footsteps echoing down the hall. I had only seconds to decide whether to stay or run before Mark walked back in. I ducked back to my desk just as Mark rounded the corner, whistling like it was just another night. My phone buzzed almost instantly. Jenna had sent me a screenshot from Slack. "You need to see this," her message read. When I opened the image, my blood ran cold. It was a private Slack conversation between Mark and another account manager. In it, Mark bragged that he was finally proving I wasn't cut out for high-value clients. He even joked that soon my desk would be available real estate. The kicker? He mentioned the very spreadsheet Jenna and I had found, saying he had backups ready if HR needs convincing. He was documenting his sabotage openly, as if he were proud of it. I forwarded the screenshot to my personal email right away, adding the photos I had taken from his computer. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just defending myself, I was building a case. But the problem was timing. If Mark caught wind that I was onto him, he could wipe everything clean before HR or Reynolds saw a trace. I leaned back in my chair, staring at his grinning face across the room. For once, I didn't see charm. I saw someone who thought he had already won. Should I bring this straight to HR, or wait until I had undeniable proof? The next morning, I made a decision. Rushing into HR with half proof wasn't enough. If Mark was bold enough to gloat on Slack, he was confident he could spin anything I found. I needed something airtight. So, I started my own quiet investigation. First step, IT. I had a friend in the department, Aaron, who owed me a favor from a late-night pitch deck I had once helped him polish. Over coffee, I asked casually if there was any way to pull detailed access logs from the shared drive. Aaron raised an eyebrow, but eventually agreed to run a routine system audit. That evening, he slid me a printed sheet. It showed logins and edits down to the minute. There it was in black and white, Mark's account accessing files at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., even on weekends. He had been going into project folders long after the rest of us logged off. At the same time, Jenna was combing through Slack history. She found more than jokes. There were threads where Mark hinted to another coworker that Reynolds would soon see who really deserved the promotion. Suddenly it all clicked. This wasn't random sabotage. Mark was setting me up to clear his path upward. But I knew just having logs and screenshots might not be enough. If he denied everything, it would turn into my word against his. That's when I decided to set a trap. The trap was simple: bait him with a file he couldn't resist tampering with. I created a fake campaign folder, complete with draft emails and half-finished graphics, then left it sitting wide open on the shared drive. The mistake was obvious enough that anyone trying to sabotage me would jump on it. I didn't have to wait long. By the next morning, the timestamps showed someone had accessed it at 1:42 a.m. Sure enough, the files were altered, emails rewritten to look careless, images deleted. And the login? Mark's. I printed the logs, tucked them into my notebook, and braced myself. That afternoon, I walked into the breakroom where Mark was pouring coffee. My heart was pounding, but I forced a calm tone. "Funny thing," I said, "our shared drive shows you working late nights on projects that aren't yours." For a moment, his hand froze on the coffee pot. Then, almost too smoothly, he laughed. "You must be mistaken. Maybe a glitch in IT system?" I leaned in just slightly. "Or maybe you've been building a case against me, hoping to step into my role once I'm gone." His smile faltered. Not gone completely, but just enough to reveal a crack in his perfect facade. And in that split second, I knew I had him cornered. What I didn't know was that someone else had overheard our exchange, and they weren't about to stay silent. The following morning, I walked into the office to find Reynolds waiting outside my desk. His usual calm demeanor had a sharper edge today. "Can we talk in my office?" he asked. I followed, clutching the printed logs and screenshots tightly. Inside, Reynolds gestured for me to sit. "I've been hearing things. Serious allegations about Mark," he said. I handed over the evidence. He flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable at first. Then, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. This is quite detailed," he murmured. "And corroborates some of the client complaints I've been hearing. I didn't want to believe it without proof, but you've given me that." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Reynolds continued, "However, I've also received a report that Jenna accessed certain project files without permission while investigating. Normally, this would be a breach of protocol." My stomach sank. Even allies could be dragged into the fallout if you weren't careful. But before I could respond, Reynolds exhaled slowly. "I'm going to handle this carefully. Mark will be confronted officially, and HR will be involved. You need to maintain professionalism, and no one else should know what you found until it's resolved." As I walked back to my desk, Mark passed by, glancing at me. For the first time, he didn't smile. He looked wary. But I sensed the endgame wasn't over yet. Mark still had one last trick up his sleeve. By midweek, the atmosphere in the office had shifted. Word spread that HR and Reynolds were investigating Mark, but no one knew the full story. Some co-workers whispered behind closed doors, while others avoided eye contact entirely. It felt like walking through a minefield. Every glance could carry suspicion or judgment. Mark's confidence had crumbled. He no longer strolled in with that perfect smile. Instead, he hovered near his desk, checking emails obsessively and muttering under his breath whenever someone passed by. Even Jenna noticed it. "He's starting to panic," she said, trying to suppress a smirk. Meanwhile, I focused on keeping my projects on track, proving that I could manage under pressure. Every successful deliverable was a small victory, a quiet counterpoint to the chaos he had tried to create. Reynolds occasionally stopped by, nodding at my progress with a faint approval, which reminded me that the truth mattered, even if it took time to surface. Through it all, the team began to subtly rally around me. Colleagues who had been uncertain or quiet started offering support, sharing files, confirming deadlines, and even backing me up on client calls. The momentum was slow but undeniable. Yet, just as I felt the tides turning, Jenna whispered something alarming. "You need to see this, Mark's not done trying. There's another layer we haven't uncovered yet." I froze, realizing that the final act of this office drama was still ahead. Jenna called me over to her desk, her eyes wide with urgency. "Look at this," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were emails Mark had sent to a former client before he joined our agency. He had been angling for a promotion, promising results he could barely manage, and had quietly networked behind the scenes to secure high-value accounts for himself. It clicked instantly. Mark's sabotage wasn't just about undermining me, it was about positioning himself as the go-to account manager for major clients, including Brightway. Every missed deadline, every corrupted file, every misleading Slack message had been calculated to weaken my reputation while boosting his. I felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't petty office rivalry. It was premeditated, long-term strategy. The careful logs, the false emails, even the staged late-night access, they were all part of a plan to push me out and elevate himself. Jenna and I exchanged a glance, both silently acknowledging the stakes. It wasn't just about proving Mark's guilt anymore, it was about exposing his ambition before it destroyed our careers and the integrity of our projects. I realized we had all the proof we needed. The question now was how to present it so that HR, Reynolds, and the clients couldn't dismiss it as coincidence or paranoia. And as I gathered the documents, I knew the final confrontation was approaching fast. The next morning, Reynolds called an urgent meeting with HR, Mark, and me. The tension in the room was almost tangible. I handed over the folder with screenshots, logs, and email copies. Each piece of evidence painted a clear picture. Mark had manipulated files, misled clients, and built a false trail against me. Mark's confident demeanor finally cracked. He stammered, trying to explain the Slack messages and late-night logins as mistakes or misunderstandings. But Reynolds held up the Brightway email chain, the Slack screenshots, and the backup logs. Every lie unraveled under scrutiny. HR confirmed the findings. Mark had violated multiple policies, and his actions could have cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars and major client trust. Reynolds gave a calm, final statement. "Mark, your behavior has consequences. You'll be demoted and reassigned. You're not fired, but this is a serious mark on your record." The room exhaled collectively. Relief, vindication, and a sense of justice mingled in the air. Colleagues who had quietly supported me now offered congratulations, while Jenna smiled knowingly. Mark sat silently, the lesson sinking in. His schemes, ambition, and dishonesty had backfired spectacularly. Karma had arrived at the office door, and it wasn't taking prisoners. Even as I walked back to my desk, I knew this chapter would be remembered in the office for months, maybe years. With Mark demoted and the investigation concluded, the office slowly returned to normal. Brightway clients were reassured, projects got back on track, and Reynolds personally thanked me for staying professional under pressure. Jenna and I quietly celebrated with coffee at our desks, sharing a knowing smile about the chaos we had navigated together. Looking back, the lesson was clear: vigilance and documentation matter, but so does composure. In an office full of politics, it's not just talent that protects you, it's awareness, patience, and knowing when to gather proof before confronting the problem. I also realized that sometimes, those who appear confident and charming may be playing a game behind the scenes. Trust is valuable, but it should be paired with discernment. By keeping calm and methodically collecting evidence, I turned what could have been career sabotage into a story of resilience and justice. In the end, the office drama taught me more than any training manual ever could. Who was wrong? Mark, undeniably. But it also showed me how easy it is for good work to be undermined if you're not vigilant, and how much allies like Jenna matter when facing challenges. So, if you ever feel like someone at work is plotting behind your back, stay sharp, document everything, and never underestimate the power of patience and strategy.